Hi, everyone. My name is Ava. I go to school at UNC and I'm majoring in Spanish and global studies. And my travels have taken me to Spain, Cuba, and Costa Rica.
Hello, everyone. My name's Sammy. I'm from a small town in near Winston-Salem called Knoxville. I'm a global studies and management society major, and I've been able to travel to Tunisia and El Salvador, and I'm also trilingual.
So these are the two places that we will be talking about today. And so, as you can see, we're in the US and Cuba is right below us, and then El Salvador is below that.
So now we're going to take questions. And so, first, if you guys want, you can ask us any questions in the chat that you might have about transportation in Cuba or El Salvador. And then after that, we'll take any questions you have just about those countries in general. So you could ask us about food or clothing or music or dance, or you can ask us about Sammy and you can ask Sammy and Ava about their experiences when they have been to those countries. So feel free to type your questions in the chat, and we'll answer as many of them as we can. All right, so we have a question. The first one is a little bit about how politics work in El Salvador and Cuba. And actually, that's something we're going to talk about for Cuba at our presentation later at 1 o'clock today. So if you want to learn more about that, you can join us then. But if you guys want to give us a little bit of information about politics or government in El Salvador and Cuba. Whoever wants to go first, feel free.
I guess I can go first. So politics in El Salvador is not similar to Cuba. It's a bit different. I feel like right now it's democratic in the sense. There is a new president, so it definitely is changing. His name's Nayib Bukele. This president right now is currently really working on improving like the economy and everything. They're actually, since like the last time I visited, which was about 6 years ago, there's definitely been a lot more work on just making sure, one, there's for education, he's been providing laptops to students who have to go to school virtually. Roads are definitely being improved. There's so much more like improvement in that, and means of transportation. Especially with COVID, there was definitely a lot more hospitals built. Um, but yeah, it's a bit different in terms of that, but definitely it's still changing.
And in Cuba, it's a communist country, so it's a one-party system. And right now, the president is Raúl Castro, but he basically was given office, so not elected. And because it's a communist country, there is like they have had different periods where they have not had different like contact with countries. So that's one of the reasons why the cars are so old there, because getting imports from certain places is tricky at times.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions about transportation. One says, how old do you have to be to take the Coco taxi? And one is, why is the Coco taxi shaped the way it is? So I don't know if there's any restrictions on age or if you know those, Ava.
I don't actually know. I know that a lot of times, like the people who drive the Coco taxis, that's what they do for a living, so that's their job. I don't know if there is an age restriction though. And for the shape of them, they're called Coco taxis because they kind of look like half a coconut. But I don't know the reason for how they came up with that design.
Yeah, I would guess there's probably not an age restriction, but that's a good question. Someone from YouTube said, "Are the bus drivers able to take breaks when they get hungry?" I don't know if you would know that or not, either of you, but did you notice anybody like changing shifts when you were on the bus? Different people taking over?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I actually didn't ride the public bus, the guaguas in Cuba, just because they're so crowded that like getting around, it was easier to walk or take the BC taxi. But I assume that like how buses work here, you know, that, a lot of bus drivers have, like, lunch, or, like, bags with them, and they're able to, like, stop and eat, you know, along the route, so maybe that's how it works in Cuba, I'm not sure.
Yeah, in El Salvador, it's kind of there's no set schedule. Each bus is pretty much their driver is gonna stay there all day. The buses in El Salvador run from like 4 a.m. till 7 p.m. So pretty much when they stop for gas, they will get off and stretch, take a break. But also when they make stops like near the city, there are people, vendors who come on the bus and will sell food and different items. So sometimes they will buy food from them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long shift, so that's good that there's some vendors. Maybe they can at least get a snack. Let's see. Another question: are there school buses or specific transportation for them? So school buses in addition to the public city buses, or how do kids usually get to school?
In El Salvador, so it depends where the school's located. Most likely, if it's someone who's going to like elementary school over there, or middle school, the school will be locally like within their neighborhoods. And so usually they walk. They will usually take, someone, a family member, someone older, just because it is unsafe to go by yourself. Um, Buses they can take. There are children who take it at a very young age. But usually that's only if like they're at a private school that's a bit farther out. And then some people bike.
Yeah, it's similar in Cuba, and they actually repurposed, old school buses because they had, because the transportation because, like, the, guaguas get so crowded, they, repurposed the school buses as forms of, public transportation too, so, like, those are, they if you, like, see one around, it's, most likely a bus for anyone to use, not just kids going to school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the U.S., typically a lot of students take just the school bus, but in some other countries, students will also take public transportation as well. Good questions. Another question: how long is a bus ride normally to go from a rural area to a city? So maybe you guys can just tell us a little bit about maybe the breakdown of how big the rural areas are in your countries versus the cities, or an example of the distance between maybe one big city and one rural area that you traveled to.
Yeah. So my dad's from like closer to the city, than my mom's from a very rural area. So I got to experience the bus ride from both locations. From where my mom is, she's about 30 minutes away from the city. So on the bus, I would say it took about 45 minutes because in between when you're picking up different people, they do stop and wait because you never know who needs to go to the city. And then from where my dad is, which is about 7 minutes from the city, it did take about 15 minutes to get to like the main center.
So in Cuba, it really just depends on where you're going. So like outside of Havana, there's like different towns that you can go, like beach towns. And that was probably like a 30-minute bus ride. But if you're going to like going farther in to the country, it could be really anywhere from like a couple hours to I don't know how long it takes to get across the country. But the Havana and Santiago de Cuba are on opposite sides. So I would imagine that it would be a fairly long bus ride.
Good. And someone asked if Coco taxis have doors at the side. So are there doors, or you just step right in?
You just step right in.
Good. All right. Let's see. All right. Another question are: what are some of the popular foods in Cuba and El Salvador? Or some of the foods that maybe you liked while you were there?
I think for me, it was definitely, even though we have it here, we're pupusas, because in El Salvador, it's so much cheaper. For three pupusas, you only had to pay $1. In the US, you pay about $3 just for one. So definitely that was very popular, easy to find. And then we have um, a different type of ice cream there. Um, and to explain it, it's pretty much like a cherry flavor, and then they put two different sauces, which is like a red and a black one. It's very sweet, but it's very common in the markets. I'm forgetting the name right now, but it'll come back to me. But that's pretty much like two of the main things people go for in the markets.
And in Cuba, I ate a bunch of rice and beans, which is pretty common, and plantains also. And they have two different ways of cooking them. So they like cut them up into like small circles, almost like chips. And you can, when they're ripe, they're called maduros and they're kind of sweet. They taste a little bit like bananas. And when they're not ripe, when the plantains are green, they're called tostones and they're a little bit tougher. And it's like a more savory thing. And then I also learned how to make ropa vieja, which is a like shredded beef dish.
Yeah, and depending where you guys live, if you ever come to the Triangle area, I know you can get pupusas places in Raleigh, maybe also in Chapel Hill. I think there's a Cuban restaurant, maybe also in Raleigh. There's lots of places that have tostones around here. That's one of my favorites. Also, I love pupusas too. You guys are making me hungry. All right, another person asked, what are some of the transportation problems they have? Do they have any problems with transportation?
I think the biggest problem is traffic because especially if it's a bus, they cannot get through sometimes. And like with motorcycles, they can just weave their way through. And also just the way like the paved roads are not as even as we have it here in the US. So that definitely has always caused the reason for the traffic. And just most of the roads are just a single lane. And then there's not much of a regulation on how fast you can go on the road. And so drivers over there have to be very precautious in how they go about getting from place to place.
And in Cuba, there is just not as much like there's kind of like there's a lot of the public transportation gets really crowded, especially the buses. So that is a problem. So that's like why they have been repurposing other vehicles to become to function for like public transportation and take people around. Yeah.
Someone said if there's a limit on how long you can get a BC taxi ride for, so I would imagine that they would get tired after a little while. But are they usually short distances or minimum?
Yeah, so it's yeah, just to kind of get around the city, but even like getting around the city, like you couldn't ride for I like the driver would get tired probably around an hour. And that would also like get more expensive. They'll charge you more if you're asking to go long distances. And I think there's like some people will do it. But it generally depends on like how much they want to work because it can get pretty strenuous because they're carrying two people around.
There's another question of if you both have driver's licenses, and maybe you could also talk about if you know the age that it is to have a driver's license in El Salvador or Cuba, or how common it is to have a driver's license there. So you can talk about what you have here and maybe a little bit about there as well.
I don't know exactly the age restriction. I would assume it's 18. There is a thing that I mean, the regulation is that you have to have a license, obviously, but a lot of people don't. If they're younger, they don't use them. It's just they only travel locally. Also, what they call their license is like a do it. So you have to go to a certain office, just like here, like a DMV, to get that. But yeah, they require that, and also just to make sure police do have license checks usually. So that's been a way to kind of incentivize that everyone to make sure that they have everything together.
Yeah, in Cuba, the age for driving is 18. But I don't know like how I don't know the process of getting a driver's license.
Yeah, in most other countries, to drive a car, it's 18. The US is pretty unique in 16, but in some other countries, you can get like a license to drive a motorcycle or a moped at a younger age before 18, but it depends on the country. But yeah, good question. We have another question about food. What foods are commonly grown in Cuba? And someone said, isn't it very sandy? If they can't grow foods, where do they get their food? So maybe you can talk about some of the foods that they can grow easily there.
Yeah, so they had a huge sugarcane industry, and that's how a lot of that was their uh, source of like exports. so that was definitely, like, really, beneficial in terms of, like, their economy, and so but you can't obviously, survive off of sugarcane, so they had to import, a bunch, and that is also, because importing to Cuba, it being a communist country, um, isn't always easy, and so they have had different, waves of food shortages. So sometimes it's hard to get certain foods, but I remember when I was there eating a lot of fresh fruit every morning. So that's something that, because of the it being a more tropical location, that they're able to um, grow lots of fruit.
Yeah, so lots of fresh food. That's great. Someone asked, what side of the road do they drive on in Cuba and El Salvador? The same as the United States or different?
Yeah, it's the same in Cuba.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yep. All right, great questions, you guys. I think we've answered all the questions there are so far. Feel free to type more questions in. And while we're waiting for more questions, if you guys want, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your focus countries, of when you've been there, why you've been there, while we're waiting for some more questions to come in.
For me specifically, my family's from El Salvador. I actually was there this past month. I just got back. Also, I did want to add a fact because I think a lot of people don't know this. In El Salvador, they do use the US dollar. I have one of these coins, but I don't think we use these a lot in North Carolina, the $1 coins. But these are very popular in El Salvador. Um, Very common to use this and up to like $20 bills. Um, but yeah, I went to visit family. That's pretty much main reasons I go. And just kind of stay and just learn about my history and culture just in general. It's a little bit, different experience because you get to see a different community and also practice, your language skills, as it's very different than the formal Spanish we're taught in classrooms. You have to learn a lot of the slang words, and also people tend to speak very fast, so they'll immediately know you're not from there once you start speaking in Spanish, due to accents. But yeah, that's been the main reasons why I've been there.
And Ava?
I went to Cuba, I think it was 3 years ago, and I was volunteering with a program called Globalware. So, like, going to Cuba, I had to say that I was volunteering there, and then once I got to Cuba, they don't they have like a restriction on how much you're able to volunteer, and so I actually had to say that I was a tourist when I entered the country. Um, but yeah, so I volunteered with this program, and we were able to plant agriculture in the actually town called Casablanca, across from the bay, across from Havana, and it's a area that is really susceptible to erosion. So by planting all of these plants, it basically allowed for the village to not get eroded more when anytime that it rained, or there was a big storm, and it also provided like a source of food for them. So I helped out with that, and then I also got to go to they have multiple places where old people live, like a retirement home, and I got to learn how to play dominoes, which is a common pastime in Cuba. And so there's like a bunch of different homes in different parts of the city, and they actually have a dominoes competition a couple times a year. And so the one that I went to, they had just won the competition. So that was really cool to be able to learn how to play that, and they are very passionate about it.
Yeah, in the streets, I know that you can see people playing dominoes. We also, I don't know if you guys that are watching have ever borrowed our culture kits, but if you want to learn more about El Salvador and Cuba, we do have culture kits, which are bags of items from those countries. We're not taking any new reservations for this year, but we'll start taking reservations for next fall in August. And I know there's some dominoes in the Cuba kit, so you could learn how to play that in some of our other Caribbean kits as well. All right, we've got more questions, lots of questions. Let's see. Is Cuba able to import more luxury goods like makeup, or are there also not as many imports on other items in addition to food that you know of, Ava?
I'm not exactly sure. I know that it's becoming more common to have imports, and they also are getting more European companies to establish like stores there. So in some of the newer plazas, they have like more like common name brand stores. So that's becoming more common.
Mhm. They're also curious how old each of you are.
I'm 19.
I'm 22.
Yeah, so Ava is a sophomore at UNC, and Sammie is a senior, so she's her last year. I have a question about what is the currency in Cuba. So we learned that the currency in El Salvador is the same as the U.S. dollar, but in Cuba, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's CUCs, CUCs, and then there's also the Cuban peso. So when I went, I had to like exchange US dollars for CUCs. But then a lot of the Cubans use the peso. So
They also want to know what the colors are of the Cuban flag and the El Salvador flag, and if you happen to know the meaning of the colors, you can tell us, but if not, you can just tell us maybe what the flags look like.
For El Salvador, it's just blue, white, and then there's more meaning between the little escudo that's in the middle, the center part. El Salvador is mainly built on like about like 5 major volcanoes, which sounds very dangerous. And I mean, some of them are active. They just fortunately have not erupted. But they put 5 of them in a line, and then the island, and then the water and all to kind of like signify like the peace. Because in translation, El Salvador is the savior. So I think the white's peace. I can't remember exactly what the blue is, but it's in the lines between like bravery. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
in Cuba, the flag is blue, white, and red, and it's like stripes, blue and white stripes, and then there's like a triangle that's red with this with a star on one side. And so I think the blue stripes refer to the three old divisions of the island, and then the red triangle stands for equality. But I don't know about the white.
Okay, good. Um, are there seat belts in the Coco taxi or in the Moto taxi also in El Salvador? Are there seat belts?
There aren't in Cuba.
No. And Sammie?
Yeah, I think seatbelts are just not really used at all, even if they are there.
Not as strict as we are here. All right. Let's see. They asked, do kids have time to play games and have recess? So I don't know if you guys know any younger kids or got to meet any younger kids. If you learned anything about recess while you were there.
From what I understood, because my cousins right now, they just started opening up schools this past week. They said they had a dedicated time for recess, but it was still labeled as PE from what I got. Um, that's pretty much all I know.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to get to talk to many kids when I was in Cuba, so I don't know what their school looks like.
Yeah, we'll have to wait. That's a good question for Jake. I think he worked in a school while he was there. He's presenting on Cuba at 1 p.m. I know that they typically wear school uniforms
Yeah.
in Cuba a lot. That's one thing I do know about their school system. What religions are common? And can you find Hindu temples or mosques at all? So in both countries, what are some of the common religions and different places of worship you might have seen while you were there?
I think for El Salvador, majority are Catholic. There are different types of Protestant churches, but I don't. I do think we have like a small community, maybe of like Jewish individuals, because I did see a lot of signs, but I'm not 100% sure about other religions. It might be common maybe in like the capital where there's a little bit more different cultures there.
Yeah, I'm also not sure about other religions, but Christianity, specifically Catholicism, is also the primary religion practiced in Cuba.
Good. Are there so it says is have you ever seen is it common to fall out of a coco taxi or a moto taxi since there's no seat belts? Do they go very fast or is it feel pretty secure? What do you guys think?
It feels pretty secure, yeah. I think that if people were falling out of them a lot, then they probably would have, better seatbelts.
Yeah.
I think it might have happened, but you know, that's the whole reason between like riding at your own risk. Um, but usually, I mean, they're very precautious unless you really have to be somewhere. It might be just someone hits a bump and you know, stuff
Yeah,
like that.
they're pretty good. All right, you guys have so many good questions. This is great. Hopefully you're learning some new things. I think that's all the questions that we've had so far. If you guys have any additional questions, you can add them in. We'll wait a couple more minutes, and if not, we might wrap things up. But feel free if there's anything else you want to know about Cuba or El Salvador, now's your chance. All right, I think that's all the questions. So thank you so much, Sammie and Ava, for teaching about transportation today and for asking the questions. And thank you to all the classes that joined us for your participation during the presentation and all your great questions after the presentation.